So do you, Banners. You probably all know Chris already, but if you don't know Chris, I think a good way to summarise the last 15 years even. Chris is probably as well known for being consistently high performing for GB at various distances, as he is for being just fairly, I don't know how outspoken is the right word, but you know you're always going to get a good interview from him. Probably the best way to put it.
Thank you.
And also quite fun. But for many people, most recently, he's known for his incredible winning the Olympic qualifiers, GB qualifiers, go to the Olympics, and then absolutely smashing out of the park. So, welcome to the podcast, the wonderful Chris Thompson.
Thank you very much. I'm imagining applause in my head.
How would, if you were to kind of introduce us, what would you, like if you met someone who never knew, say you were dating for the first time and you were meeting someone's dad who was a runner and you were trying to impress them with your prowess, like what would you lean on?
I'm glad you said the dad rather than what would I say to a girl to impress. As my wife knows, I'm a shocking at flirting. I think it's difficult. I think my answer probably has changed quite dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years, because for a long time I would say I was an aspiring athlete, and then in my sort of early days, and without really thinking about it being a career, and then I became a very obsessed sounds quite extreme, but very passionate, driven, obsessed kind of athlete to get the most out of myself. So I guess I'd then introduce myself as a full-time athlete, driven to push my own physical limits and beat everyone. And now I kind of feel a bit more of a rounded kind of athlete, and I feel a bit more kind of, how would I describe myself? Can I call myself a bit more of an ambassador for the sport? A bit more of a kind of someone who, yes, I dedicate part of my time to pushing myself to be the best I can, but I also see myself as someone who's trying to help the next generation, promote the sport in a good light, be there where I can to help it, and almost be a bit of a kind of I don't know, a kind of, I feel like distance running is kind of my office in a virtual office of the network of people, you know. So I guess yeah, it's a kind of depends on the mode how cocky, or not cocky, but how deep I go on it. But I definitely would I call myself you know, I've dabbled in coaching, I've dabbled in a lot of things, and working with On Running as my main sponsor. I am primarily an athlete, but even with them I do a lot of ambassador work with athletes and do a lot of shoe development and all these kind of things. And so I feel like a much more rounded, almost an entrepreneur of the sport, I guess. Maybe that's a good way of describing it. So I don't feel typecast initially being a runner anymore. So.
And actually, but before we go back into that, because I'd love to go into what you saw as a transition, like what was the trigger for you changing from that amateur to being so focused on performing? But did you see the On Running refugee runner at last
7:29 3K?
Unbelievable. What do you make of it? What are On Running making of all that? Because we know it's Dominic, isn't it? We interviewed Dominic a couple of years ago, and to suddenly pull that out of the bag. I've just watched it back on the BBC, and no one knows what to say. None of the commentary staff had any idea of, like, they kept on calling him someone else because they just didn't know who it was. But how much do you know about that, and what's your kind of perception of that?
So I think what we're seeing, I think that what happened there is a reflection of what's going on with the sport a little bit at the moment. Insofar as that, I think and there are other situations as well. I think athletes are getting opportunities that unlike before, and I think with shoe technology and what that's doing to athletes behind the scenes and motivating and enabling athletes to do more, recover quicker, blah blah blah. and someone like a company like On investing in areas that may not have had investment before, is, I think, bringing up surprises. Because for me, I feel like we spent a long time through the 90s and noughties and into the teens, and it was a handful of athletes you got used to seeing dominating big races. Now, yes, you've got your Cheptegei, you've got your Borregas, but I feel like every time I watch a Diamond League and every time I watch a Major Champs, you're seeing a different group of athletes. So I think if you take a step back and look at it, I think it's I think at the moment you're seeing you're seeing a lot of, I think probably unexpected, a lot of racing happening, and this guy has clearly gone away and worked hard. I don't know much about him. I need to look into him a little bit more myself, I have to admit. And I think it's a great run. But again, 7:29 3K, when you look at the race as a whole, I think you can attribute a large chunk of that race as a whole to shoe technology. Would it have got as big of a shout, let's say, if it was 1 in 8 minutes? No, the time makes it kind of really stand out. And I think it's still, I think the sport's still adjusting to getting used to these kind of things happening, and athletes. And also, one more point to add to that is, I would say we're still not sure how athletes respond. So some are going to respond better than others, and I think that's changing the game. When I race now, I'm racing athletes, and when I race athletes, I used to race them with a certain understanding of how that athlete would react based on how I read their body language and everything. Now, things are changing. Athletes are sounding like they're in their last throws of the dice, and they're still hanging in 2-3K later, and you're going, how can you maintain that? And again, physiologically speaking, things have changed and the sport's changed. So I think it's exciting. I think it's bringing about surprises, and I think this World Championship is going to do the same thing. I think we're going to see a lot of surprises there as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. If you're no longer equipped to actually race in the same way you were, because you can no longer make assessment of athletes. That's crazy. Like,
well, it's different. It's a different assessment. It's not a case of you can't. You have to adjust what you do to figure out. Like I'm a very track running is a different skill to road running. Track is a very track is something that you can. So for instance, I remember, it sounds like I'm going off piece a little bit, but a physiologist said to me a long time ago, he brought up, I think it was Sydney 2000, 800 meters. And I want to say that was the year that is it Schumann won the 800? It might be 2004, whichever year the German athlete won it. And he was a big surprise, and he beat Kip Keita. And it was like, and this physiologist just took it on himself to look into it a little bit. And he worked out the Schumann guy ran 801 meters. Kip Keita ran 822, something like that. And so he technically ran a faster 800. He just ran wide. And track running, sometimes you don't realize if there was a way of checking, but some athletes are running 10K, but they're running a heck of a lot further than others. So it really, positioning and all these other factors really matter. And you can't read an athlete as easily on a track because of the nature of you going around bends and you're generally in single file. On a road, different. You could be in the middle, you're all running the direct line, and you've got 5 or 6 athletes around you, and you can literally listen and figure out every single person, read people a lot easier. And it's just changed. It's not a case of you can't, it's just a case of it's different, and how athletes respond, and how, when you decide to kick, because you know that athletes are going to hang tough for a little bit longer than they used to. So I wouldn't necessarily, you can't, it's just different.
I remember when we were talking to Jake Smith, and he was saying he was coming through and getting used to suddenly racing GB athletes to racing worldwide, and how Kenyan surges were this thing that you suddenly found out about, and mid-race, that would be their way of stress testing all of the athletes. And you almost needed to be able to respond just to let them know that actually they've not got this yet.
Yeah, well, you've got to. There's a few different. You can do it a couple of ways, but the time I had in 2011, I raced Gebre Selassie at Manchester 10K. This is way before shoe technology or anything like that, and that was my first real introduction to what heads up road racing really was about, because before that I'd mostly done track with the odd road race scattered in there. And I went into that race and I'd not long run 27.27 for a 10K on the track. I was in good nick. I was actually in better shape than 27.27. I'd had a few issues going into the race. So I went to Manchester in pretty good form. And this is obviously all pre-spikes and shoes and all that kind of stuff. And so it was very raw. So recovery from a track race, I mean, it was 2 weeks later, I think the race was. So that's not a lot in old shoes. In new shoes, I mean, people are recovering in days, but which is the way it has. But back then you needed the recovery. And so I still went into it with a little bit leggy, but I knew Haley was old, and people kept billing me saying, look, Tomo, he's there for the taking. He's there for the taking. And he's won it most years. And I built myself, I can have him. I can. And there was Craig Mottram was in the race, some big names, but really I knew it was going to come down to me and him just because of the time and where people were at in their careers.
In a way, that's what you'd want as well, isn't it? That's the poetry.
Yeah. So we got to 5K, and Manchester's very quick, the first 5K. We got out pretty quick. I forget the time. It was like 14 minutes or just under, whatever it was. But it was pretty relaxed in terms of no big moves had been made. And we got to just after 5K, and Haley kicked. And in my head, the whole way I was thinking, just stay relaxed, don't do anything. My whole game plan was when he kicked, I was going with it no matter what. And he went, and I went, I'm going with this. And I could tell this was not going to be the pace to the end. He was just trying to drop everyone. And I literally just put my head down and just went, I'm running way out of my comfort zone here. And I just went as hard as I could with him and just wait and hoped he would stop pushing eventually. Eventually he eased off.
Out of interest, what kind of pace increase are we?
So we were on low 28 pace at the time. So he must have thrown down an 800 in crikey. It would have been at least a 210 in that ballpark, 208, something like that. So we'd gone down to possibly quicker. I can't remember, but it felt like I was running the last 800 of the race in terms of how hard he went. Then he eased off. And in my head, I thought, right, okay, he's going to go again. I don't know when. Just try and recover. And he only gave it like a minute or 2 minutes, and then he went again. And I was like, just go. He can't keep doing this. And I held on to him for as long as he can. And right when I was getting about a minute 90 in, he just got a small sniff of a gap, and he kept going. And then it was a case of I just was struggling. The gap was slowly, and we got to the end, and it was I think he beat me about 10 seconds in the end, so it wasn't a huge amount. And afterwards he said in interviews he was very shocked because he could tell I was all out, but I didn't seem to care. And he actually said he didn't come across many non-African runners that are that brave that early to go, because he could tell I was completely out of my comfort zone. I'd completely discarded everything just to try and stay with him. And he basically gave me a pat on the back and a basically like, fair play for being, because I don't usually get European athletes that do that. And I went away thinking, oh, that's good. And it also showed me that I didn't realize how much he thought about what he was doing. And that made me think a little bit more, hang on, I need to think a bit more about road running as well. And that day I learned a heck of a lot about strategy, road racing strategy, and how different it was to track. And it's to this day, I do wonder if I'd have had a bit more road racing experience, if I could have got closer to the win that day. But I didn't. So
what do you think the difference would have been with experience, though? Because you'd have held on longer, or you'd have not gone quite so hard, or
I would have uh, basically, and I've done this a few times, I would have made him think I was all out, and just but been close enough for him to feel like he had to he could get away, and just kind of done it in a more gradual. I'd have kept myself a bit more in my comfort zone, and then because Bikali did it to me. I say he did it to me. I knew what he was doing, but I couldn't do anything about it in the big half in just before the pandemic. But that was partly because I'd put these super shoes on for the first time in my whole career, and I couldn't understand what was going on. I literally was like, my legs feel like they're going to come off. My brain was fried. So that was part of the problem that day. I just didn't understand why I wasn't getting tired.
And have you ever tried reversing it? And you say before that 5, have you ever thought that's what they're going to do, and tried to then push them slightly earlier?
Yeah. Done all kinds of things like that. I mean, I've done it. I've bluffed a few times in. So even like Great South, there was a year. I forget the year it was, but me and Andy Vernon had a really good ding dong battle, and we were very evenly matched. And at the time, I was gearing up for New York Marathon in a couple of weeks, and he was coming off a track season, was in good nick, and I'd done a session a couple of days before because I was in marathon mode and trying to train tired, and he knew I'd done it, and I was quite happy for him to know I'd done a session, because I thought he doesn't know I'm strong, but he now thinks I'm tired, and I was hoping that would mean he would make a move earlier, which he did. He made a move really early, but I think it was a mile or two in, and I waited for him to make the move and then just hold a 10-15 meter gap. And then it got to about 4 miles, I think. And then I could feel him sort of ease off the throttle, because he couldn't sustain it. And as soon as I got on him, I gave it a couple of seconds, and then I made my move, because I knew he was still trying to recover, because I assessed the situation, and then I made my move. And then again with that, the problem with that was that my move was very much this is not a short term, this is a blast to the end. And I managed to win it. I think I ran 46.56 that day. So I ran pretty quick, but it wasn't just a simple gun to tape. There was a thought process behind it, which I think Andy, he's a good friend of mine, but at times I think he was guilty of not thinking enough, and he took things a little bit too much on face value. But he was a phenomenal runner, especially on the track. He was great, but on the road he hadn't quite thought about it, I don't think, as much as he could have done. But yeah.
And why do you think European runners, if what Holly says is right, what have we been trained out of that approach? Have Kenyans been trained into it?
I think, well, don't forget this is 12 years ago.
Yeah.
When this conversation, I think European athletes' attitudes. I think athletes in Europe are. It's difficult. I don't want to say different, because I think we've always had very strong, precocious European athletes, and I can think of many that have been phenomenal athletes. I think that there's some of it is probably a little bit of an unfair stereotype, in terms of, like, for instance, the thought process Europeans are weak is also something that I think is used to empower the athletes that think that. So it's not necessarily a true thing. It's just a way of believing in. You believe enough the hype, then that will give you the power. Like, but one thing I do think that a lot of athletes can be guilty of, like we are. So obviously I was part of the OTC, and we had Kenyan athletes on the team, and really good friend of mine, Sally Kipyego, she had a really good way of looking at life. And one of the things I remember saying to me, because I joined the OTC, I thought at 27, with 1 or 2 years left in my career, I really thought I'm old. It was drilled into me that once you hit 30, you're done from a young age, which isn't crazy to think I'm 41 now and I'm still going. But and it always played a little bit on my mind while I was there that I had not long to go, make the most of it. And that kind of made me push a bit harder than I should have done. And I remember having a conversation with Sally, and she said, oh, you Westerners, that you see age as a barrier. Like, we don't even think about it. And I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, you're right. How often do we assess something, whether we're physically capable, but once we feel we reach a certain age, that becomes part of the thought process. When we're young, we don't think about it, because usually when you're young, it's the excuse is, oh, I'm not old enough yet, so I will get there. But once you get to a certain age and you're not going to get any younger, there is that element of, I can't do it anymore because I'm older. And it kind of made me shake that and go, stop thinking about that and just think about how I feel and how I feel day to day and how I'm operating, and ignore numbers, which literally mean nothing in reality. And I spoke to Helen Clitheroe and Joe, athletes who went very late in their careers, and both of them said the same thing, of that they were waiting for something to happen, which never came. And I think that's why when it comes to anything, when it comes to sport, and I've kind of gone slightly off piece to bring it back to when you're racing and setting limits of, I can't sustain this pace to the end. Sometimes it is about taking a risk within a race to find your limits and work around your own personal limits, rather than avoiding them is not the right word, not empowering yourself to as many weapons as you can. If you can surge in a race, it's another weapon. If you can go out hard from the gun, it's a weapon. If you can sit and wait. I mean, my biggest sin is I don't know how to sit and wait. I can't do it. It's a real weakness of mine. I like to get on with it. I like to start pushing things. And so it's just another form of armory more than anything. But I think European athletes they're not stereotyped to that kind of that way of thinking. It's just, if a certain group of athletes think enough, it's just empowering them. I think most athletes can feel guilty about if they're vice versa, that a European, I'm sure plenty of athletes out there just think, when they think of the best distance runners, they think of Kenya. People do that. They automatically think Kenya, rightly or wrongly, or Ethiopia. You generally think in that direction. So, but it doesn't mean people can't beat them. It's just how it's kind of ingrained in us a bit.
And do you think, with just talking about age, do you think the new shoes are extending people's careers? Because from what I've been told, definitely.
I think it's for me. Sorry to cut you off a bit there, but yeah.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I obviously working with On Running and what they have, the shoes they've produced. And I mean, yesterday I ran 28:59 for 10K on the road in heavy marathon training. There's no doubt their shoes are hugely helpful. I mean, in training for this marathon, you can just do more. I mean, my life is crazy now with a child and the way things are, and recovery is, I mean, I don't get the sleep I used to. And if I'm trying, but if I've got shoes that mean I can get a session done without being as drained, which means if I don't have a great night's sleep, it doesn't get me ill or injured, it's a huge help and advantage. I mean, it's quite often, I think older athletes, probably the drop in performance is more to do with lifestyle, as in like time, being able to do it, because you get close to your 40s, late 40s, a lot of people have a young family they're providing for, and they've probably climbed quite high in their job, and jobs getting more demanding and other commitments, and kids are probably getting a bit older and they want to do stuff on the weekend, have a kickabout, and so you don't have time. And that's just life. Life just happens. And for me, if Theo was 5 or 6, I'd probably struggle to train because I'd want to take him to play football or take him to wherever. And so in some ways, I feel like my career will wind down when life happens rather than age. But I think the shoes are a big help. Big help.
If Theo's listening in the future, he's to blame basically for your impending collapse of.
or for getting me back to my wife, who bless her. I think at the moment every weekend it's like, can we do something else other than go to Bushy Park and go in the sandpit and watch you run round, please?
Yeah. I mean, because how is that being two athletes as parents?
I think it's again, I think that's a big help because she gets it in a way that is difficult to if you're not immersed in we're in July now, and I'm heavily trying to be disciplined in February, and that's quite a hard thing, I think, for sometimes for people to get their head round, your partner to get your head round, to be that committed that early from a big race, because you think, well, you got ages, and you're right, you've got to have a balance. But I think for Gemma, and again, I don't have to say, if I say I've got a big session coming up, I don't even have to say any more, and she knows, and she will automatically do little bits that she knows makes an athlete's life easier to concentrate on that. And also, yeah, I don't want to say be being a little bit kind of on edge because you've got a big session coming up, and being understanding of, sometimes that is, it makes sense because you're a bit worried about the fact you've got a 25-mile run coming up the next day, and you might just be a little bit in defense mode.
You're still getting nervous, are you, about your training when you look at it?
Listen, it's funny, I was having this conversation with my coach the other day, and we were talking, I forget the reason we got onto it, but Alan Story, my coach, who has coached, I'm sure people on your podcast a lot of them have heard of him and his successes as a coach. He said to me a long time ago, I was living in Loughborough, I was just a young kid. At the time, I hadn't really had an injury. I just literally played hard, worked hard, wasn't thinking about a career in running. But what I did have, and I got from my early days at Aldershot and with Mick Woods, was I had a real, I don't know what it was, but when I turned up to a session, I had this real itch to push my body as hard as I could. And that, as you get a little bit older, I'll say not much, like up 2-3 years in, it starts to become quite a nerve-wracking thing to do, because you think, God, I've got to go to that place again. And you start, and you know what it's like, and you start going, oh God, I've got to go back there again. I've got to go, oh God. And I had a conversation with Alan, who was the head of endurance. And he said to me, Chris, if you're not waking up nervous and anxious about what you've got to do that day, you're not in the right headspace. And I thought, oh, okay, because so often if you think something's going to be easy, you don't do the little bits you need to do to get up for something, and you invariably don't feel too great. It's like tapering for a race. You think, I'm in great shape, I've just got to do some 400-meter reps, and you always feel groggy because you're not taking, mentally, you haven't wound yourself up for it. And I'm a big believer in waking up feeling a little bit anxious about stuff I've got to do that day, because that's when I know I'm pushing myself, that's when I know I care, and that's when I know I'm going to take it seriously. And that goes for anything, like in terms of not just running, but about anything I'm going to do. If I'm a little bit anxious about it, then I know then I'm going to flipping well prepare for it. So I still get it. And again, there's a balance, because if you have it too much, then it can be overwhelming. But like my big session was I say big, they're all big, but it's like 10 days ago, whatever. And I reckon and it was Sunday, I reckon from Friday night, I started to zone in. So little things like going to bed early and conscious about my drinking, because I knew I was nervous. I wanted to feel good. And I started just to zone in on, right, because if I didn't, and I thought it's going to be easy, I wouldn't stay up till 12. I don't know, eat a load of crap. But, it's, excuse my French, but it's, it's just, you need that worry or fear, in my opinion.
How often do you have in your training plan a session that scares the life out of you like that?
I think all sessions give me a little bit of the ghoulies, but I think ones that give me, I guess, if you rank it as a night before worry or a 2 night before worry, I reckon in a marathon build up, I'd say I get a 2-week period where I'm really having to fight to keep myself from tipping over. And I'm having to fight to, so even after that session, I know I've got another session coming up in 2-3 days, and I've got to get myself. That session is only going to be good if I still back it up. And so I would say in a marathon build up across, say, a 12-week period, I reckon there's a 2-week period where I'm really having to work hard to keep myself on the straight. And that, ironically, we're pretty much coming out the back end of this period now, and unfortunately, as you know, because we've had to delay this by a week, I picked up a bug from my boy right at the moment. But again, that's when you're vulnerable. I might not have got it if I wasn't on edge, because my immune system would have been stronger, but I was weak because of everything that's going on, and I caught a little something from him, which that's the nature of the beast. It's the nature of marathon running. You're pushing your body to an abnormal place. It's not like lifting max in a gym or trying to run a 5K or a 10K. You're actually trying to run yourself into depletion in a way that's, so.
And how much do you think moments like that win medals? The luck of not catching an illness from your son at the wrong time, or niggles, or whatever it may be. Like how big a difference do you think these small percentages make?
I think they're big. I think they are huge when it comes to marathon running, more so than possibly other events, because generally speaking, you don't get quite the drop off in shape. Like if I missed a week or two and I'm in 5K, 10K mode, give me a session and I'm off and go. But in marathon, you can't really afford to, because it's all about lots of threshold stuff. So it's not intense. It's about the body of work. So I think not getting something at the wrong time, I think there's a bit of luck involved, but also, let's be honest, if I was an Olympic gold medalist, and that's gold medalist, if I was a Kipchoge, for instance, I wouldn't be at home around a kid that's going to nursery in a non-horrible way. I'd be isolating myself on a training camp at key moments. So for the last 5-6 weeks into a champs, you'd be going, right, I'm in a health bubble to minimize those risks, because I am a genuine, you can't always get away with it, but you minimize those risks. But for me, it's like my family is my journey to it. And he's, this week, if he brings something home, he brings something home, and I can't, it's a choice you make, I guess. But again, for me, and this is the tough thing about marathon running, is for the marathon, you get into this peak, and if for whatever reason you don't get to run it, you got to it's quite a come down to bring yourself up to do something else, whether you race it or not. So it's a lot of emotional, physical energy going into it. But that's part of the addiction of it, because when it goes well, it goes well. When it goes wrong, it's well, that's kind of part of it.
Well, I found that fascinating when we were at Runfest Run, and part of your talk was about how drained you were prior to the Olympics, because you're so used to the rhythm of pre-marathons, but suddenly, because of lockdown, going to Japan early, having to isolate, extending the period at which you were preparing for a race away from home, actually had quite an impact on you.
Yeah, I mean, the whole, from qualifying through to Olympics, I mean, obviously Theo was born the week I qualified, and so it's not like it was my second or third child, it was my first child, and it's life altering in terms of how, you don't get a manual of how you look after us and what you do, and both me and my wife are trying to figure it out. And I don't think I can't, looking back after that marathon, bearing in mind I went into it with not a huge amount of sleep, I don't remember a moment after that race for weeks where I ever felt like I got a sleep that regenerated, because generally after a marathon you're floored for a couple of days, but I felt like I was still marathon day 2-3 weeks later. And I think I never fully got myself out of that. So when I started back, I was fit, I was extremely fit, but there was just an edge missing, and I was just carrying that fatigue through my prep. But the prep for Tokyo also included trying to do a lot of heat acclimatization work, and that was really draining as well. So I was doing a lot of training wearing extra layers. So I never got I felt like I was running with just this constant kind of backpack on, with trying to recover with a new kid, psychologically how you handle that, training for a very extreme race, not recovering from the trials, not because the gap wasn't big enough, just but purely because it's of what has circumstances. So I never fully felt like I ever got on the front foot. So when it got close to the games, and then you're realizing, if I test positive for COVID, I'm not going, and I've been through all this for nothing. And it just felt like layer upon layer of hoops you were jumping through just to race. And your body can only tolerate so much stress. I mean, you're constantly on this seesaw of, you need stress, it's good, it motivates you, it brings you on, but too much and you tip and you start underperforming, and not enough and you're flying high and you're kind of all over the place and you're not really doing a huge amount. So there's this balancing act, and I just didn't get off on the right foot going into it, and never fully got on top of myself. So I was always working on an incline on the seesaw of stress, and it just got one thing after another. And when I got out there, and again, something I didn't consider at the time till actually quite recently, but going that way across the globe, so I was effectively racing in the middle of my night. That's tough as well. And we were there, I don't know how long we were there for, but we weren't really long enough there for me to train and get into the rhythm of that. Not for anyone's fault, that's just the way it was. And I just never really felt like I got into the race at any point, because it felt like it just felt like I was tired, and the conditions and everything. And so it was when I finished, I spent the last kind of 8 miles of that race. I went I'm not sure where I went. It's the hardest 8 miles, or the hardest race I've ever done, because it was so much had happened going into it, and during it was very tough to do. And I went to a very strange place to get to the end. Like, it is without a doubt. You've seen the film Fat Boy Run with the Simon Pegg with the wall, when they talk about the wall. It is without a doubt the race where I felt like I was having to run through multiple walls, just because it felt like I couldn't lift my legs at times. It was bizarre. I mean, I could see drinks on the other side of the road. I just didn't know how to get to them because I was too busy trying to run forward rather than sideways. So it was it was an interesting one, but I'm proud I went, but it was tough, very tough.
Do you think there's anything you could have done to have just stepped back a bit and actually recovered a bit more, or even adapted to suit that race at that time?
Yeah, but I think that's the really tough point of life versus, I don't want to say passions or slash job. I'd have had to have been I'd have to have been selfish in a non-horrible way, but I'd have had to have made a few decisions which would involved putting myself and my Olympics before my family, which at that moment in time didn't feel right. I felt like we had started this journey together to finish it, and that sounds really corny, and I apologize, because it kind of is, and I'm not that kind of person, but it was my way of rationalizing what the decisions I was making at the time, because I am a very much I'm quite a hard-laced, if that's the right saying, I'm quite a straight-laced, straight-talking kind of person of, you take responsibility. You don't make something happen, you take ownership. It doesn't matter. The buck stops with you, no matter what. That's just how I am and what I believe. And I'd made decisions which I knew were not helping what I was trying to achieve. But that was on me, and I did it for the reasons I did it, because I wanted to be, I didn't want to finish the Olympics and then go and then be a dad. I wanted to be a dad all that time, and hence why I didn't go away. I didn't go in any camp. I didn't want to leave, because I wanted to be at home and be part of being a dad for those months. And so even now for this World Champs, I made the decision I'm going to stay here and not go away, because I want to be at home. But this time I've had I've been able to take a bigger step back and figure out how can I mix these two things together to make it work. Whereas earlier, it was A, too difficult to do that because it was too fresh, and B, I was still trying to recover. But this time I took a huge break at the end after the Olympics to just really reset, make certain I was clear of any fatigue mentally and physically, build up really slowly, and just slowly start building blocks into how I could have a life that involved being the dad I wanted to be, and being the athlete, as close to the athlete as I think I can be, without doing the odd 1 or 2 percenters like being at altitude and all that kind of thing.
And do you think that's something that coaches and GB training and general associations need to be able to almost adapt training and coach people through becoming a parent and adapting training plans to suit, and just, or do you think it is more of a choice that you just got to choose, I'm all in on training, or I'm looking for that balance?
I don't know. It's difficult because I don't know how many athletes have actually. I don't know how common it is, or what athletes' experiences have been like if they've had children and kept going, for men or women. I know Paula did it very successfully, and she did it the hard way by actually having the kid. I didn't. Obviously, we're not quite there with science. I know Butchard and Lindsay Sharp have just had a kid recently, and so I know he's going to the World Champs. So I'd be interested to have a conversation with him and how he's handled it. But I think Paula, Andrew, and there'll be other athletes in there. I know, because I was thinking about, I suppose, with Mo as well. But again, we know how he's handled it, because he's always said he's gone away to, at key moments, he's just gone away and done what he's needed to do. So I think, from my point of view, certainly Alan and I are really good at just navigating what I need to do in my situation. We don't look at, right, what's the optimum thing for me as an athlete, because that's not life. We got to look at the optimum way to maximize just my life and feed the two together and marry the two up. And that's just using his experience, my experience, and being able to play off each other. So depending on what athletes want to do, because it's not like Mo's shown, like you can, if you have a child and you can go into your camps, you don't have to change a huge amount. But if you're bringing your children with you, it's a different dynamics and how you emotionally cope with that. I think I don't want to put words in his mouth. I think Andrew and Lindsay took Max with them to their training camp. So I don't know. There's some part of me that goes, look, you make that decision, you've got to figure it out, and it's not necessarily up to a federation to do that. It's about about performance. On the human side of it, I kind of go, well, in this day and age, it is nice to help people understand how to mix the two. So I get caught in two places really, because I do have this ruthless side to me, but I also have this kind of it's not easy, and there is a way. Sometimes just you need a helping hand to figure it out.
And now that you've got more of a context on the sacrifice, the balance, like what has it changed your expectations of what you're going to achieve and what you want to achieve?
Yes and no. Honestly, I still I'm sitting here talking to you, knowing everything I've had in my build-up, knowing everything that's happened. Well, case in point, it's actually more relevant to say, when I went out to Tokyo, there was still a percentage of my brain that thought, well, I could get a medal here. Which sounds ridiculous, but that's why I still run, because there is that small part of me that daydreams, and that daydream, I have daydreamed in the past, and it's worked out. And I've kind of gotten used to the fact that sometimes I've got a daydream 10, 12 times, and then I get one, and then I catch one. And so I did for even after everything I said about Tokyo, and I'm doing it again with this World Champs. There's that small part of me that goes, what if? Even though I know there's bits and bobs, I'm very, very good when I stand on the start line. All those little annoying noises that go on in your head of things that aren't right, for me they disappear. The overriding excitement of what I'm about to do kicks in, and I can believe in anything. I mean, I'm like, the best way to describe me is again, in 2012, I fractured my sacrum, my back, about, I think it was 9 weeks from the Olympics. And I was doing everything I could to get on that start line. But I was like, the Charles Van Comeny rang me and asked me how I was. And it just came to me. I was like, I said, I feel like an animal that's just been hit by a car, but has no concept it's been hit by a car or it's been injured, and still trying to leg it like it's absolutely fine. And I thought, that's me. No matter what happens to me, I just, for some reason, keep trying to leg it, like, metaphorically speaking, because obviously, at the time I couldn't leg it. I was having to go to the gym and stuff, but I just don't seem to back down from challenges I set myself until it's over, and then set myself a new one. And my challenge this year was to get to the World Champs and do the best I can. And regardless of the build-up I have, like, anything can happen on the day, and then I'll set my next challenge and go from there. But it's too many times. Well, I say too many times, and not happened loads, but in the past I have sat there and daydreamed about, what if I could do that, and I've done it and gone, bloody hell, that feels good when you do it. The problem is, you do that, you start setting yourself more ridiculous aims.
And are you looking at champs and wanting them to be in harder conditions, more extreme conditions?
No, I don't personally. I'd rather them be in. I'd rather them just be in around Bushy Park or something. No, I don't. I'm just one of those kind of. I'd rather just have a swing, just swing as hard as you can on a nice flat hard course, and just go hell for leather. I don't like putting. I'd rather not have the back. If they're there, they're there. But I'm not a fan of extreme conditions and all that sort of stuff. Not that you can't do it. It's just, And again, to a certain extent, that's racing. That's probably better for racing. But yeah, I'd rather just lash it.
And do you think because without the extreme conditions, it almost seems at marathon distance, no one from Europe's even close, really. Even Mo was miles off.
In terms of, do you mean in terms of like European, as in the times, or do you mean from medaling?
Well, medaling, like, I guess, have come close in hard conditions typically, but when it's been a typical World Championships, Olympics, when the conditions have been normal-ish, that's when it really comes down to the time and the pace. And if you look at the shorter distances, the middle distances, then there's always people in the mix, but you can't really say that as frequently at marathon distance.
Yeah. I might have to bow down to your memory on that, because I can't totally, if I'll be honest, remember. I'm thinking back to like things like Athens when it was an Italian that won it. I'm thinking back to the World Champs has not been around for that long. People forget it's only been going since the late 80s, early 90s, and I think it's only been won in under 2:10 once. And I'd have to go back, but I've got a funny feeling 2:10 is the average winning time.
Yeah,
I'd certainly put my hat on saying it's the average, but again, that might reflect what you're saying about conditions. In terms of who they are, I'm trying to think of other possible Europeans that have. I'm sure Pinto's been around, and I'd have to look it up. I'd have to. Yeah, maybe you Google, but I can't think. But it's. John Brown's been fourth twice at 2 Olympics. Callum Hawkins has been fourth twice.
Yeah, Callum's been amazingly. Yeah.
So you've got British athletes specifically there who have been there or thereabouts, and so I think the one thing you can say about championship running compared to big city races, yes, you definitely get a very much a non-European dominated result in big city marathons than in a major championships. But that's largely down to the fact there's no limit to how many athletes you can have from a certain nationality at a big city. It's up to the organisers how many Kipchoge-esque athletes they get. It's their choice. You've also got the scenario of that. One of the big ones is if you have a list of athletes and a couple of them get injured or something happens leading up, they can quickly replace them with someone who is healthy. But you can't do that at a World and Olympics. So if you've got 3 Kenyan athletes preparing and one of them gets ill, you're down to 2. Or on the day, if one of them's having a bad day, you're down to 2. You've not got another load of Kenyan athletes coming through. So on a given day, when you're all preparing for this one race, I think it's the bigger factor than necessarily the conditions, because I do think certain European countries, I think UK is actually good at preparing athletes. I think a lot of them are very good. And if you get on the start line healthy, that is actually a big part of it compared to a big city where, regardless, anyone on that start line is going to be healthy because they'd have been replaced. If not, World and Olympics, anything could have happened to these athletes. They could be carrying an illness or they could be they've had a niggle for the last 3 or 4 weeks and they're just going to hobble around. You don't know. So I think that's as much of a factor as the conditions.
And because I'm aware we're kind of coming up to the hour mark, I don't want to go into a whole.
I've been rabbiting on as usual. Sorry about that.
Not at all. No, it's really, really interesting. And but the one thing that, because we've mentioned on quite a few times, and you've obviously come through different distances but different priorities as well.
Yeah.
How would you describe? Has it changed throughout your career? What's important to you as an individual, or to future runners, that you think they need to achieve be seen as successful or to be able to continue as successful based on things like sponsorships, based off prizes? Has it changed what you now need to aim for compared to when you were beginning in the middle of your career?
Quite a loaded question. I think so.
Honestly, just genuinely interested to know.
Yeah. No, just mean in terms of how I answer it. In terms of that's what I mean in terms of how I go about it. So I think it's changed significantly in terms of so when I talk to athletes from the 90s, which even though I was a runner there, I was a kid, and I've talked to Tim Hutchins and a few other athletes from that era. They do talk. Some of the stories that come out with, which probably shouldn't mention, it sounds like they did all right financially, and the way it was run through, I forget his name. Anyway, the way the sport operated, as much there wasn't a lottery funding system, there was a very hard working. You know who I mean?
I know the guy you mean. Yeah, I think he died a few years ago.
Yes, he did. I can't remember his name. Anyway, just the way the sport was, people worked hard, they played hard, and some of the numbers that have been mentioned to me about what an athlete would earn from a race would to be honest, is still more than what I see athletes get today. For a similar standard, there's no application of inflation in any way. But then again, there were less athletes then, so there's probably less being divided around. So when I came in, it was weird. It was like lottery funding came in, and there was this sudden shift into information sharing and experts coming together to try and facilitate and help an athlete be better, and a lot more science and research. I mean, there was always stuff before, but it became a very methodical kind of process in developing athletes and pathways, and it was a real kind of, it was a great time to be part of the sport in a very different way. So it wasn't lucrative because we weren't far away from a recession, and we went through that, and that severely. I mean, I look back on, I think I'd have earned a heck of a lot more if I was an athlete of my standard then today, a lot more. And I think I'd have earned a lot of money if I was 10 years earlier. I think I got very unlucky with the era in that sense. But then at the same time, I benefited from the lottery funding and the way that was very much kind of there to try and help you be better. But I think once those learnings kind of drip fed into athletes, and I think that's helped more in the last 10, 12 years. All those learnings have really started to kind of filter through now. So there's a lot of stuff out that I know was born through experimental work through myself and other athletes, that athletes now benefit from, which we were kind of guinea pigs of how, like, you know, and so there's a lot more understanding of why things were happening when they were happening or whatever. It's like, and even with altitude training, I mean, I didn't get into altitude training until late, very late in my career. But there was all these other things going on. So I think there was a weird kind of progression for the sport, which is now over the last, like I say, 5-10 years is really we're seeing. And I think now it's an interesting one at the moment, because when you look at what's going on, it's, in some ways, it surprises me that certain athletes don't get a heck of a lot more publicity and praise for what they do, considering what they're doing. And then, but on the other hand, it's amazing what athletes can get through self-promotion, through the opportunity of social media and all these things. And so there's opportunity, and it's just, there's this weird kind of performance slash self-marketing thing going on at the moment, which is interesting, because we've got Olympic medalists in Josh Kerr and Laura Muir and Keeley, and they're all kind of got these incredible achievements, but I wouldn't necessarily say, I don't know, someone like Eilish isn't just as well known through her achievements, but if you go 20 years ago, an Olympic medal was the be all and end all of publicity, where I would say Eilish does a fantastic job of achieving great things, but backed it up with a great social media presence, and for all intents and purposes is probably as valuable to sponsors as if she'd had an Olympic medal, but with no presence online. Do you get what I mean? So I think you're seeing two different kind of opportunities there. You can achieve and get lots of notoriety, like you always do with Olympic medals, like those athletes have got. But you've also got someone who can still gain that through other means. And obviously, road running, I feel like is a big industry now. Road racing and what that can do, and being on TV. It's and even for myself, it's like without road running, I wouldn't be able to keep going, because it's a way of making money as well.
And is that more prizes or appearance fees or sponsorship contracts?
It depends. It'll be a mixture of all three of those things, and it depends on the athlete situation. Or I mean, it's no secret that if an athlete has a good summer on the track, then making appearances at road races later on is going to come with a nice appearance fee, because they want those athletes there. And on top of that, there usually is some kind of prize fund as well. But you'll see athletes this summer that do well across those three championships appear in the Great North probably, or these other road Fifth Avenue Mile. It's almost like these are exhibition races that athletes, and rightly so, because without those races, it is difficult. There are athletes out there who I know are not sponsored, who are phenomenal athletes, and other athletes that have it. And so but again, that's the beauty of, I've been through a year with no sponsor, and so I've had to make it up through road racing just to keep myself in the game.
Which is pretty nuts, really, given you've got a high profile, you've had good results. Granted, the Olympics didn't go as well as you'd wanted, but you're still first Brit in difficult conditions. And I've been sponsored by On for 5-6 years now, so they've been. Sorry, are you in the middle? Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, it was this. I'm talking like it was 2000. It was the previous Olympics, 16. I just missed out on making the team, like just in the marathon off. Again, by far probably my best ever performance ever. I ran 2:15, and if you speak to Lewis Moses, so I'm sure you're aware of, and I lived with him in my build up to that marathon. How I ran 2:15 that day, I will never know, but I got really close to making the team. But I had no sponsor that year, and I remember speaking to my agent, going, in a bit of a shtuck here. I've kind of put all my eggs into making the Olympics. It hasn't happened. Need to start looking into some races to try and, because I had no ambition to stop running, and so I needed to A, earn some money, and B, race myself fit. And I had a couple of races in America lined up, one after the other. So I was going to stay out there with Mark Carroll, Irish runner, in between races. And Gemma dropped me off at the airport, and I remember saying to her, if I don't earn any money from this trip, I might have to retire, because I might have to go looking for a job. Because at the time I fully believed if I needed to get a job, I couldn't train enough to do what I needed to do, and so I would retire. That's how I thought anyway. And I went to Atlanta for the first race, and I was running with Scott Overall, and we did our run the night before the race, did some strides in this car park, and on the last stride, I tweaked my hamstring. I was like, and I was trying to massage, and I was like, this isn't shifting. Anyway, started the race, got a mile in, had to pull up, walk back to the hotel, and then I was like, I don't believe this. And I basically put my foot up, or leg up, should I say, for the week, because the flights were booked. I was staying with Mark. Went to the second race. I managed to hobble around, and I think I earned like 200 or 300 quid, which paid for half my flight. And I came back, and I was in this real state of I don't know what to do. And it's weird. I go back to I still don't quite know what I did, because I literally at that point was a bit like my brain and physically I knew I could do more, but I was in a real financial dip for my situation. It was just a real kind of what happens, and then I signed up to run the Great North not long later, and I got a phone call after the race from Scott saying, you're not sponsored at the moment, are you? I said, no. He said, I've just had a guy called Ollie Laws on the phone. I said, right. He said, he wants to talk to you about the new company he's working for called On Running. I said, all right. So I spoke to him, went through it, looked at the shoes, talked and literally spoke to the owner. And it was literally a conversation of, look, really keen to help you, have you involved. We want to get, because at the time they only had triathletes and they wanted to get into running. Do you want to work with us on this, get into running a bit more, buy you a bit of time, but also see this as a move to eventually work for us one day. And it was just an opportunity. I was like, I can't turn this down, because it was loaded with, just get me back on my feet, just to run a bit more, but also with a thought process of bringing you more and more into this young company that has got big ambitions and possible work one day. And I've never looked back. And again, you just never know what's around the corner, but that was just one moment. There were moments before that point, but I kind of, as I was telling that story, I started to remember the chain of events then of 16 and what that ended up. So I ended up at the end of that year joining forces with On, and I was coaching Emilia Goretzka at the time, not Goretzky, because that's the boys, as I don't. And that's the thing. It's like, you need these moments where people kind of help you in situations to keep you going. And I wouldn't have had the last 4 or 5 years. I wouldn't have gone to the Olympics. I don't know where I'd be right now or what I'd be doing. I'm sure, I'd make the best of whatever it is, but you never know what's around the corner and the opportunities you get and relationships you can build. And I think it's never plain sailing, and athletes are all the time going through these like moments, because you think every year is going to be, well, I'm going to use that when I say things like, in 2010 I had a year that just seemed to, everything I touched seemed to work. Not every year is a 2010. Most of the time you get a 2010, then you probably get a 4 or 5 years of toughness before you get another one. So it's kind of it's a very unsettling kind of career in some ways, because contracts are only as long as the date on them. And it's not, and to the final point of it, it's, again, and a lot of athletes will know this, one of the things that I think is a really, really tough thing that athletes go through is that quite often signing a contract comes off the back of potential or good years or good performances. And so you're effectively, what's presented to you is something that's mirrors what you've achieved at that moment. But within that, very often it comes with that kind of base can be taken away if you start underperforming and reductions come in. and Nike are renowned for that, for kind of, look, you achieved this, so it's worth this, which looks great, but it only takes one bad summer and it suddenly is not great. And again, that happened to me. 2010, I had a great year, and then 2011, I picked up an injury, and it was my first taste of this ruthless business side of, I chose not to go to the World Championships. I chose not to go. And rather than I wasn't picked because I wanted to recover from, I had an hernia issue, and my Achilles as well was sore. So I had a hernia rot rather than go to the World Champs and let my Achilles settle. And they reduced me significantly. And that rolled over for the next few years. And I thought, hang on, but I chose not to go. And that if I'd have just got on the plane and jogged round, they wouldn't have been able to. And it was kind of my first taste of, wow, that's ruthless. But that's, and then to get it back, and then you're working off a lower wage packet kind of thing. So it's I think we're seeing changes. I think that was it, Alicia Montano with the maternity changes and things like that. There's been changes to female contracts. I think brands are definitely, certainly working with one of the big things they do, and I'm sure, and I don't want to start not saying other brands don't do it, because I don't know, and I'm sure brands do, but there's definitely, I feel like brands definitely see athletes a lot more like a partnership. And certainly from On's perspective, they've done that with me and athletes that have come on board of, we don't want to just advertise on you. We want to help you, and we want you to be part of our family and you be part of yours. And I think that attitude has helped a lot change and make an athlete feel a bit less under pressure to I don't know, not justify, but hold on to their career a bit in that sense.
Yes, I still think that's fairly unusual though, because we interviewed Mary Kane probably about a year ago, who set up I can't remember the name of it now. It's something like Athena or some similar running club with the intent of, it was her, Alison Felix, a few others, purely to be able to help fund people so they wouldn't have to have the similar contracts. And the intention is to not only fund them should they have kids, but fund them should they have a hard year, and for them to also then have future careers where they'd transition out of athletics into sport in other ways. But I do get the sense that, and having spoken to quite a few athletes, it's still pretty brutal out there.
Is it?
And I guess the difference with On and potentially other just smaller companies is actually the value of an athlete who can actually help feedback on their product is immense. Whereas if you're a Nike, you're not going to listen to your athlete unless maybe Kipchoge, but no one else. You're selling trainers no matter what, and actually the feedback of the individuals doesn't really change the marketing machine that much.
Yeah, it's interesting, because definitely with Nike, when I was with them, it didn't need my thoughts. I suppose would be one way of putting it. I mean, they did have like think tanks with athletes and get their opinion on different bits and bobs, but nowhere near to the extent with On. But again, with On, it's I think, like you say, because it is a growing company and it is valuable getting the feedback. I also think that they're trying to, or they are building foundations that are very different to what I've experienced before. Because even the day one, when I first met and introduced to them, it was very much like those key values were so important that it didn't matter if that was the growth or whatever you want to call it was not the be all and end all. It's like we want to be seen a certain way. There's even little things that they didn't want to almost self promote too much with certain things. Like if you look at some of the vests that I've raced in, sometimes people have thought I didn't have a sponsor because the emblem's so small, and they almost didn't want to make it too big. So I thought, I'll be too bold and too like in your face. We don't want to we just would like it to be subtle and smart and stuff. And that's just trying not to be too overbearing and like, you know. So I think it is. Yeah, that's an interesting, and yeah, I think you're right. But I also think athletes, and I think I've started to see it where athletes will vote for what they want, and it isn't always about the biggest paycheck. It is about the relationship and what. And I've had conversations with people that have joined On, and one of the things they like about On compared to other brands is the fact that they want them part of their marketing ideas and promotions, and athletes want that. Because if an athlete can go to a brand and be on an advert, they want to be involved in those things because that helps them self-promote, and they can get other sponsors off the back of that. And I think that's something that I know On push. You know, look, we want you part of. You know, I've certainly been part of. I mean, I think I was with Nike 10 years, and I think I probably did 1 or 2 appearances, whereas On I've done so much stuff, and it's great fun. So yeah, I think it's interesting, yeah, because I think it probably is brutal, but I think there's enough brands now there that are bucking the trend. I think a few brands are probably going to make the market a little bit different in the years to come. I think it will have to change, and I think it probably is already.
And do you last question, just because this is more for my I saw the UK champs when I was just watching it back a few days ago, and it just broke my heart to look at how many seats there were, and it just empty seats there were, and it just amazes me now. And I've always wondered what it must be like from an athlete's perspective, because you look at something like rugby sevens, not at all a comparable sport, but rugby sevens used to be at Twickenham, and they'd have a third of it sold out. They just changed the ticket price. They gave out free tickets as special discounts or early buys or to local school kids, and within a year or two, suddenly it's sold out. Everyone's paying for their tickets, but also there's an amazing atmosphere of people going to buy food, to buy drinks beforehand, and it amazes me that hasn't been done for UK athletics. Like, is that something that you really notice as an athlete when you turn up to stadiums, and does it signal to you that? I think
you could ask a lot of people, a lot of athletes, and a lot of different people involved in the sport, and they probably all come up with a slightly different answer as to why. But certainly, yes, it is heartbreaking. But I think for me, I kind of, in some ways, it sounds bad, shrug my shoulders and go, yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because in a non-horrible way, I don't think the fan base is in any way reduced. If anything, I think the fan base of athletics, track and field, and the athletes, I think, is increased, and I think there is a thirst for it. I think the problem is that no one likes, in my opinion, no one likes to get involved in something where there's inner fighting. You know, if no one wants to go and watch a game of cricket if the establishment and the athletes aren't all getting along, and it's just they're just, even if, you know, you see Bairstow, I can't even say his name, Bairstow doing lots of hundreds, but there's not really the aura that they're all getting along and they getting by and winning. And I, bluntly, honestly, I feel like we've got some phenomenal athletes doing great things, and we've had great success at the Tokyo Olympics. But the reality is, I don't think the sport is at peace with itself within itself. I think, and a lot of it stems from the federation. And I know they've made changes and there's been things going on, but we've had so much drama go through the federation of late. It's been insane. It's ridiculous. I think that's filtered down. I think there's too much inner squabbling. Squabbling's not the right, but too much kind of disagreement or not really people bonding enough with as a core for the sport. I can't vouch for all the different event groups. I'm more talking endurance, but I don't feel like endurance is one unit in the UK, and I haven't felt that for a long time. I mean, bluntly, I felt like an outcast for a long time. I don't feel like key individuals in the sport, as well, it's just not. I don't, and I think that is what is given off, and I think that is reflecting in bums on seats. It's reflecting in a heck of a lot of stuff, and hence why you're seeing things like the podium group going, we're going to fix the sport and do this, or Highgate doing what they're doing with Kew Gardens and the marathon. I mean, did British Athletics do anything to help that? Did they? Heck, I mean, we wouldn't have had it if it wasn't for Tom Bedford. I mean, British Athletics have literally survived over the last few years through individuals with a love for the sport, keeping it together. And we still don't have a head of endurance, and we haven't had one since Barry and everything that went on there. So, and I personally think it's all, and that's what I think that reflects the bums on seats, because it just doesn't look good from the outside. And so until we get galvanized a little bit more from within, and that gets fed into the athletes, fed into the coaches, fed into the families and networks, I think it will change very quickly. But I don't know how long that, I don't know if and when that will ever happen. That's the problem, because a lot of the people that I think could solve this have been pushed away, and probably for good. And that sounds a bit sad to end it like that, and I apologise, but I think but you shouldn't have asked me about the bums on seats.
Yeah, true. That's true. It was
I think, because the thing is as well, right now, what's for me the most fun is going to road races. Like, I was at Gateshead 10K. That was great fun. Loads of support. Callum Johnson was there. Loads of locals coming out to support him. There was more people there watching that 10K than watched the British trials. Way more.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm around. I'm not at the track and field champs anymore, so I don't have to worry about it. I go to these marathons, I go to these road races, and Manchester 10K, tons of people, lots of happy people being there, supporting their loved ones. And that is kind of, that's where I get my thrill, and I don't have to worry about. But I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think anything's going to change anytime soon if we keep employing who we're employing. So, but hey.
Well, on that bombshell, to quote Alan Partridge.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and good luck with the build up to February. We'll all be watching, and if there's anything we can do to help in the near term, the mid term, or the long term, then let us know.
Yeah. Then you'll be watching in. I don't know when you're going to put it. When are you putting this out?
Probably 2-3 weeks, I think. So not long.
Oh, so it'll be after the World Champs.
Oh, yes. Well, we can move it forward if you want.
No. Listen, it'd be quite funny, because if I don't know, would the result affect, like, how, I don't know. Imagine if I won and then played this. Imagine if I came last and then you played this. I don't know. Yeah, put it out after.
Fingers crossed.
I should do a prediction then if it's going out after. I predict.
That's a good idea, yeah.
No, I shouldn't have said that.
Well, what would you be happy with?
I think what would I be happy with? I would say I'd give a gold, silver, a bronze being top 10, top 20, top 30.
Okay. Yeah, nice. Good wide span as well. So
yeah,
hopefully something to keep you happy.
Well, because the other problem is, don't forget, like with these things, you don't know how many start, because it can vary quite a lot actually. But certainly I want to be a lot higher than what I was at Tokyo, which was, I think, 51st or something. I want to be a lot higher than that. I wouldn't, if I'm worse than that, I would not be happy at all. I won't. There's no way I won't be. I'm in a much better place than I was going out to that. So.
Well, here's to 50th. So fingers crossed for that.
I will be 50 soon as well, the way I'm going.
Amazing. That's great. Cheers, Chris.
No worries.
Fuck you, buddy.